All right, it is officially 12 o'clock. I'd say before we jump in, maybe we give folks another minute or so to make sure everybody who's here, everybody who wants to be here is here. Easy for me to say. And then we can jump into some introductions quickly. I know I said I would introduce you, Hillary, Russ, and Jack, but I might pull a little switcheroo here and ask you to briefly introduce yourselves. But before we get there, I guess I just want to say hi, everybody. Happy noon on Wednesday. Thanks for joining us for this travel management lunch and learn webinar. We've got a handful of great, really knowledgeable folks here to walk us through a whole lot of detail about what travel management is, why it matters, and why it's relevant right now. Couple housekeeping things before we get going in earnest. If you have the option, please make sure you mute yourself when you're not speaking. There will be time for Q&A right at the end. So feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A function as we're going, and we'll answer all those at the end. Thanks for your patience on that. Um, I think apart from that, this should be pretty straightforward. So I'll just start at the top of my screen here and maybe ask Hillary to introduce herself first.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Hi, everybody. I'm Hillary Eisen. I'm Wild Montana's Federal Policy Director based in Bozeman, Montana. And I have been working on issues related to Forest Service travel management for most of my career. And yeah, I am pretty a nerd out on this issue, I guess. But when I'm not working, I also really enjoy travel management because I enjoy recreating on Forest Service trails. And if you enjoy Forest Service trails, you most likely um, experience travel management in one form or another.
Awesome. Thanks, Hillary. And next on my screen, Russ.
Think I'm unmuted. Russ Enos. I am currently the president of the Great Falls Trail Bike Riders Association, a local club here in Great Falls. I'm president of the Montana Trail Vehicle Riders Association, which is an association of local clubs across the state. I'm also currently the vice chairman of the board of directors of the American Motorcyclist Association. I was the chair for the previous 6 years to this year. Um, and my previous career to what I'm doing now, which now I manage a ranch, but prior to that, start from about 9 years ago, going back about 20 years, I was the executive director of a group called the National Off-Highway Vehicle Conservation Council, which was an educational foundation, and we focused on um, off-highway vehicle recreation management and helping people get engaged in a positive way, and working with agencies to develop best management practices and stuff like that. So I've been at it for a while.
Awesome. Thank you, Russ. And last but certainly not least, Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack Troyer. I retired as the regional forester for the Intermountain region of the Forest Service after about 39 years with the agency. In 2004, I was assigned by Chief Dale Bosworth to lead the national team that wrote the travel management rule we're going to talk about today. I also served a long-term detail as an acting deputy chief, and in 1988, I was the first interagency coordinator for the Forest Service and National Park Service in the greater Yellowstone area, which I can tell you, since that started in 1988, that was an interesting assignment. I live here in Helena with my wife, Carolyn. I like to hike, raft, ski, and otherwise, I just like to be out on our national forests. I also wanted to thank Wild Montana and Hillary and Alex for giving us a chance to do what we're going to do today.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here and walking us through this. And without further ado, let's get into the history of the travel management rule. And if my notes are right, Jack, you were going to get us started.
I am. What I want to do is do a little bit of ancient history and then a little bit more recent history. But let's start because the executive orders, EOs, executive orders have been in the news lately. A little bit of background on that. So going clear back to 1972, President Nixon established the very first unified federal policy to regulate off-highway vehicles, and I think we all say OHVs, but to do that on public lands. It was EO Executive Order 11644, and it directed federal agencies, including the Forest Service, the Park Service, and the BLM, to develop regulations that identified specific areas and trails where off-roading was okay or not okay. So for 50 years, it served as the foundation for federal travel management plans. It also said that OHV use needed to minimize resource damage and mitigate conflicts between users. 5 years later, 1977, Executive Order 11989 by President Carter amended the President Nixon order and directed that federal agencies implement trail closures if OHV use caused, quote, considerable adverse effects to public lands. So 11989 was frequently used over the years in court to uphold agency restrictions and points of view and against motorized user litigation, and it was at times criticized as vague. Then a few weeks ago, you probably all followed the story. President Trump signed an executive order that, quote, removed unnecessary and counterproductive restrictions on access to federal lands. So federal agencies are now directed to initiate rulemaking to replace the repeal EOs. So the first two EOs that we've lived with for 50 some years, they're gone. So to get us more closer to the present, so in 2004, Chief Dale Bosworth faced one of the most important issues of his tenure, and I know that because I was part of it. And the question was, and the issue was, what to do about the threat of unmanaged recreation, and especially the exponential rise in the use and number of OHVs. So from like 1997 to 2001, the number of OHVs in use on the national forest increased nearly by 40%. Both motorized and non-motorized communities of users and our own district rangers in the field were asking us that we do something to address what was starting to look like unsustainable resource damage plus growing user conflicts. So what it really meant is that the time of unlimited cross-country travel was nearing an end simply because there were just now millions of OHVs instead of thousands. I could go into a bunch of numbers, but I don't know them as well as Russ does, but I know he knows them and he knows it's a big industry and the numbers are large. So knowing action was needed, and with the crucial support of the Bush administration at the time, the Forest Service published a proposed travel management rule in July of 2004, asking for public comment to amend the regulations we were using at that time. And those were built during a time of much more limited OHV use on public lands. So the draft rule that we worked on, it gained solid public support because it focused on the concept of designated areas and routes and local control. Each national forest would have its own travel management plan built through public involvement, resulting in a map showing users where they couldn't and couldn't go. We decided there would be no one-size-fits-all national plan. So I and a team that Chief Bosworth assigned to do this, we traveled extensively. We met with lots of people and organizations. When the draft came out, we received 81,000 plus comments from individuals and organizations, and we published the final rule in 2005, which incorporated these concepts. Plus, it clarified policy to all motorized use on the national forest. It was supported so strongly that remarkably, there were no appeals and litigation. And all of us know that that didn't happen all that often. Implementation began soon after, and that kind of brings us up to today. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Jack. That was great. And I know you introduced these off the top, but I know we're prone to getting into acronyms over here. So Jack clarified that an EO is an executive order and an OHV is an off-highway vehicle. And we'll do our best from here on out to avoid acronyms. But if we do lose track of ourselves, please just drop a question in the chat and we'll try and answer it. Next up, Russ.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to talk about how um, actually how the rule I think was actually a very good rule, and at the time that it was written, I want to say that you guys actually did a really good job. I think that when a rule like that is released, it takes some time for people to really understand it. I know that that happened in our community, in other communities, was to really wrap our heads around what it was really all about. Um, and at that point, I was employed by a nonprofit. I was the executive director of a group called the National Off-Highway Vehicle Conservation Council, which is such a mouthful. I will just call it NOVAC. That was our short acronym for that. We understood that this was a literally a kind of a once in a lifetime shift away from how we'd done travel management to a process that allowed for us to get away from unregulated cross country use, which we knew was unsustainable for exactly the reasons that Jack outlined. But in order for us to have a resulting system of trails and routes that met our needs, that our people that were participating as advocates and as riders needed to be as engaged in the process as possible in a positive way. So it was at that point, 2005, 2006, where NOHVCC put together a system or a program where we went out on the ground and did workshops to explain to riders, to advocates, and also to agency folks, what the travel management rule was about, how they could become engaged in the process, what the steps were, how they could propose trails and trail systems, and advocate for high quality trail systems that met their needs. And that was a huge thing for us. We did over 100 on the ground workshops all over the United States. And then we followed that up with webinars, which that was back in the early days of webinars. We did a couple hundred of those. And I believe we had a pretty significant impact in helping off-highway vehicle advocates become engaged and come up with a really usable, hopefully for the most part, usable trail systems that protected the resources and provided what we were looking for in terms of experiences and fun. That's kind of the nutshell version of what we did.
Wonderful. Thanks, Russ. And with that, Hillary, take us away.
Yeah, and kind of similar to what Russ's organization is engaged in throughout the rulemaking process, and then as travel management rules have been implemented or created around the state, while Montana, and I think the same can go for the conservation community at large, both in state and nationally, has been very engaged in travel management as well and in that rulemaking process. And for us, it actually goes back prior to the travel management rules. So before Dale Bosworth was chief of the Forest Service, he was regional forester here in Montana for Region 1, Montana and Northern Idaho. And I know Dale is a participant on this webinar, so he might correct me in the Q&A, but my understanding is that when he was regional forester, he actually held or kicked off a process across the region to regulate ORV use under those executive orders that Jack mentioned, particularly focused on ATV use. And while Montana was very involved in this, there was a lot of public hearings and a lot of public outreach. And potentially, this process was so active in the region, there was so much interest in it that I think inspired Dale to then take on travel management at a national effort when he became chief of the Forest Service and learn from that Region 1 effort. So Wild Montana has been interested in this topic for a very long time. And then as the travel management rule is put in place, or following it being put in place, now in Montana we have travel plans for almost every national forest in the state, with the exception of the Beaverhead Deer Lodge, or with the exception of the majority of the Beaverhead Deer Lodge. But many of these plans have been in place for a long time. So the Gallatin Travel Plan, for example, was put in place in 2006. The Little Belt Castle, north half of the Crazy Mountains on the Lewis and Clark National Forest, was originally written in 2007. The Custer travel plans, there's three of them, but 2009, 2008 was when those were written. And a couple of forests, such as the Lolo, published a motor vehicle use map, which is kind of the end result of travel planning, under a provision of the travel management rule that allows for existing decisions to be published on a map if they meet the requirements of the rule, and there's a public kind of notification and engagement process through that. And then more recently, the Bitterroot National Forest completed its travel management plan in 2017. And throughout that whole process, Wild Montana has worked to engage our members with the interest of seeing travel management as an important step towards larger conservation goals. Ensuring that recreation use is kind of figured out, um, and then we can move on to wilderness proposals or large forest planning efforts. The travel management rules requirements to minimize conflict with other uses and minimize impacts to natural resources and wildlife are really important for conservationists. For other uses, travel management is the most important tool for maintaining non-motorized trails for hikers, for horse users, for mountain bikers. Mountain biking, the travel management rule applies to motor vehicle use. So mountain biking is managed separately. Sometimes it's taken on as part of travel management, but it's kind of nested within it. And then for protecting natural resources, whether it's ensuring there's seasonal designations for protecting winter range or calving areas, keeping motorized trails out of riparian areas, or ensuring that there's good solid stream crossings to prevent sedimentation and other impacts like that. Those are all ways and reasons that the conservation community is really interested in travel management. So it's something we've been very involved in over the years.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hillary. We are right on time, so you guys are crushing it thus far. Um, Moving into the next section, we're going to make a little time for everybody to talk about the benefits of the travel management rule from their point of view, as well as some of the shortcomings of the travel management rule and maybe how it could be improved. And Russ, in my notes, you're up first. Is that right?
Okay, yeah. So the travel management rule, there's been a lot of talk about potentially the rule being repealed, which I am strongly against because I believe there are some real positive aspects of the rule. And while we certainly should look at possibly some um, revisions to the rule that might make it better, I think that overall it's a really important rule. And of course, number one benefit was it provided the framework to manage cross-country travel. I think I was probably one of the first people in the motorized community to say it out loud that that's not a manageable long-term situation with the exploding growth at that point in time of motorized use, and it continues to grow. So, I think it was the right rule at the right time to help us with unmanaged cross-country travel. Some of the more important aspects of it for me also is that the rule was written in such a way that it allowed the folks in the agencies to adopt previous decisions. And an example of that, Hillary mentioned some of the stuff that had been done in Montana with under Dale Bosworth's guidance. I know that the three-state EIS was a good example of good work done during that time. Also, things like the travel planning in the Little Belts and the Highwoods. Those were really well done plans, and we had, we were strongly engaged in those, even though, they were not fun and went all the way through, even through the court system before they were ultimately settled, or at least the Little Belts was. They were good decisions, and they were allowed to be adopted under the travel management rule. Um, Also, it allowed for agencies to prioritize the areas that needed to be done sooner than later. And probably one of the most important changes with the travel management rule was that the rule allowed for annual revisions. And that's a big deal. Um, I think the travel management rule was one of the first rules written in the agency that really had a strong eye on adaptive management. And having been involved in travel plan from the 70s, since I was a kid, literally, um, every 10 to 15 or so years, we would revise the travel plan, and it was just kind of toss the old one out and let's start over. And it was always a very tense and traumatic experience to get through those. And we didn't always get the best results, I don't think. And then, once that rule was set, it was set. And it was pretty difficult to make revisions. Adaptive management and annual changes are huge because as we go through travel planning, conditions change. Also, we learn what about our trail systems works and what doesn't work. It's important for game management. Seasonal restrictions can change to allow access for, you know, uh, harvesting more animals. That was probably, in my mind, the one of the most important aspects. The other thing that I think is important about the travel management rule is it did encourage collaboration. And while the collaboration has been successful in some areas and not so successful in others, I'm pretty proud of the work that we've been able to do in Montana with a number of collaboratives. And a good example of that is the Friends of the Little Belts, where we actually have pulled together motorized, non-motorized, county commissioners, snowmobilers, the snowshoeing and skiing community, and we're able to talk about travel management, and we have a foundation to work on, and we've actually made recommendations to the forest on changes that can be made to the travel plan that we can all agree on that'll make it better for all of us. So those are some real positives. Do you want me to hit the negatives also right now, Alex?
Either way, whichever you prefer.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead since I'm on a roll.
Sure.
There are some things that from our perspective, my perspective, I should say, that I think deserve to be looked at. Um, and potentially revised. One of the things is that the travel management rule, one of the underpinnings is the executive orders. And from my perspective, of course, 11644 kind of set the system, but 11989 really set the off-highway vehicle community up kind of on the short end of the stick in some ways, because it kind of encourages systems to be the minimum size so that they can minimize the impacts um, to all kinds of things. It also it kind of meant that if there was a dispute that we, in our eyes, sometimes looked at it that motorized automatically was the loser in the battle over which trails might be opened or closed. So that's always been a concern for us. Um, it I think encouraged managers to just provide the minimum that could get, I guess, to satisfy users' needs, but not try to really maximize benefits in any way. So I think that needs to be looked at. Another thing that I think needs to be included in further direction, and I don't know if this is a modification to the rule itself, but there at the time that the travel plan was being implemented, it was done on a pretty short timeline. The rule was in '05. I believe really planning in earnest didn't really start till '06 for most places. because it took them a while to get the ball rolling. And there was supposed to be, as I recall, a September 2009 deadline when you were supposed to have your plans complete. And I believe that pushed some forests into rushing through the process and maybe not getting as good of a outcome as they wanted or was possible. Um, Even though I think that, with if the annual revisions were used in a positive way, it could have resulted in better systems. One of the other shortcomings of the rule itself was the motor vehicle use map, which you guys, Jack and um, Dale, you guys know more about this, but I assume that this is where the lawyers got involved and said this is going to be a legal document, and it really isn't a terribly beneficial document for the public to use. So it really didn't show enough information to tell you where you were, how to navigate. It was really something that an enforcement officer could point at and say, this is the legal document that says you can or can't be there. So I think that we fell short on that side. I'm very much a believer in the four E's of management, which are education, enforcement, engineering, and evaluation. And I believe that good, high quality maps, which we've used to our great benefit in this area in Montana, are critical, and that the MVUM fell short. So, I guess that's kind of where I'm at. I think that we can all sit down and have discussions about how we can improve the rule, but I sure don't want to see it go away.
Great. Thank you, Russ. Really appreciate your perspective on all this. Jack.
Uh, yes. First of all, Russ did an outstanding job of summarizing the benefits of the TNR and what could of the TMR and what could be improved. So I'm just going to see what I can kind of add to that. I have one overall comment I wanted to make, and that is that the importance of good, effective travel management regulations and the subsequent plans they produce. I mean, they're important. They're essential to caring for and using today's national forests and public lands. Good ones balance conservation and wildlife, recreation use, and other values, and they provide clarity for all users. I can't imagine the chaos and the conflicts that could ensue if we just didn't have them in this era of increasing use. So I kind of an overall thought that I have. Uh, there's four benefits, a couple of which Russ touched on, but I want to expand on of the rule. The first one is that it not only required public involvement in the process, but in most cases it succeeded in getting a lot of people involved, and that's a good thing. It's always been a contentious issue for the Forest Service and its employees as more and more users and different types of users enjoy outdoor recreation. The second one point I want to make, and in my opinion, by far the biggest accomplishment of the rule, and Russ did touch on this, is that it did provide the platform for the vast majority, not everybody, of course, but the vast majority of users to realize and support the idea that unlimited cross-country travel was coming to an end, just because there were just so many users and so many machines. The concept in there, as I'd mentioned before, of local control, local maps, designated routes and areas, resonated and it worked. I think that's why there were not appeals and litigation. A third point I wanted to make is it was the first time, as I look back, at least it pops into my mind, that one of the objectives was to produce a local map that made it clear where you could and couldn't go, and specifically involved users in creating that map. And it was a good opportunity for the agency to work with publics. And I think people appreciated that. And then the last thought is that it provided the opportunity and a framework for a good plan to be crafted, because like I said, they're just so darn important. But a good plan has clear and enforceable routes and areas where you can go. It minimizes environmental damage. It mitigates and minimizes conflicts between users, and it tries to maximize safety and the experience. So when I look back, I think, well, not every plan ended up succeeding equally, but overall, collectively, great progress was made because of the rule. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jack and Hillary.
Yeah, so wrapping things up here, um, I don't want to repeat everything that Russ and Jack just said, but a lot of overlap there, particularly when it comes to, the benefits of the rule. Um, you know, can't can't really disagree with anything that's already been said here. I think overall for us, we see that, the travel management rule ensures that motorized use is sustainable by requiring a thoughtful public designation process. And so it requires the Forest Service to consider not just one user group or one type of activity, but in concert with all the other things that the forest is managing for. That those minimization criteria, the requirement to minimize conflicts to other uses, uh, impacts to natural resources. You know, I would love if the Forest Service had a mechanism for doing that for all recreation planning. I think I do agree with Russ that in some ways it kind of puts the spotlight on OHV use, but that doesn't mean OHV use is the only use that needs managing on our national forests. But by requiring a designated system, it gets everyone thinking about where uses are appropriate, where they're not appropriate. And again, for non-motorized recreation, that is really important because sometimes it works really well for everybody to share the same trail, and sometimes that doesn't work. If it's a really busy area or you have, you know, horses and mountain bikes and hikers and it can get a little messy, right? And then siting trails appropriately, not just thinking about where to designate use, but also what those trails might look like, whether it's, going around a meadow, having the proper type of water crossing structure, putting seasonal designations in place. All of that helps to manage the use sustainably. And as I mentioned earlier, travel management's a really important first step towards many long-term conservation goals for groups like Wild Montana. For example, the Gallatin Travel Plan really which shaped the Gallatin Forest Plan in some ways, the Custer Gallatin Forest Plan. They didn't change anything about the travel plan when they got into forest planning, and Wild Montana and other organizations, now are, proposing or, have kind of proposed legislation that would uh, create, designate wilderness, designate recreation areas within the Gallatin Range. And fundamental to all of that, in my opinion, is the Gallatin Travel Plan. On the kind of con side, I agree with a lot of what Jack and Russ said as well. A few things that I'd love to see improved with travel management is, and I think Russ mentioned this too. There's no deadline for creating plans. There's no time frame, and so there's a lot. Most national forests have travel management plans for summer use. Very few national forests have travel plans for winter use, and so there's a whole other season out there that is still kind of in that Wild West way of kind of pre-travel planning approach to things. Also, really importantly, and I know Russ mentioned this, the maps are not user-friendly. The motor vehicle use map, the over-snow vehicle use map. I was joking. If you're looking for a map to navigate with, this is not the map to use. It's very much a legal enforcement tool. I think Russ is right. The lawyers had a say in that. So improving that map template, one, so that it can integrate well with all of the different GPS apps that we all have on our phone and use for navigating when we recreate. That would having better interface there and just making a maps that can actually be used to understand where you're at on the forest instead of having to have a second map to go along with your travel map. And alongside that, better education um, alongside the planning so that once the plan is out there, the public understands what it is, how to use it, what's changed, what hasn't changed. Um, and then also, in travel management planning, there's not a lot of kind of fiscal or socioeconomic consideration of things. And especially in our, time of declining agency budgets, I think it is important to think about what what sort of trail system is sustainable for the agency, including with assistance from partners, but like what can actually be managed and maintained and you know not contribute to ballooning maintenance efforts. And, again, the adaptability of the plan is important there too, because if those fiscal considerations change over time, there could potentially be the opportunity to grow or change the designated system as well.
Thank you, Hillary. A wealth of information between the three of you, so thanks all for that. Quick reminder, if you do have any questions that come up as we're going, just drop them in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the hour. But before we do that, let's get a little bit into why we're talking about the travel management rule right now. If this thing has existed for 20 plus years, why is it topical at this point? So Hillary, could you keep going?
Yeah, of course. So circling back to what Jack said at the very top of the webinar here, especially for those who maybe joined a little bit later, um, there's a couple of executive orders from the 70s that underpin all travel management on national forest land or on public lands, not even national forest. But on May 29th, President Trump rescinded those executive orders, or repealed those executive orders, and as part of in a third executive order, I guess he issued an executive order repealing other executive orders, and also in that executive order, or instructed agencies, ordered agencies to revisit or repeal their travel management regulations. But even prior to that, the Forest Service had announced, gosh, I think sometime last year, I'm not going to try and remember the exact date, that they were going to be repealing the travel management rule, and I think all three, Jack, Russ, and I would agree that revising the rule is something we'd all be happy to talk about. Repealing the rule is a really bad idea. So that's the concern about the travel management rule being repealed is certainly what's driving this conversation now. There are, however, statutory Congress has passed laws that relate to travel management. So, for example, the Explore Act, which is finalized or passed by Congress in 2024. I get my dates mixed up a little bit, but it requires national forests to publish motor vehicle use maps and over snow vehicle use maps, and those are the end product of travel management planning. So, there's a bit of different. The agency's getting a lot of different direction here. But at any rate, we are very worried about losing the travel management rule. Already, the Forest Service is under a department ordered, so a USDA, Department of Agriculture, ordered National Forest to pause all travel management planning. And that pause has been in place for a number of months now. And here in Montana, that is tying the hands of forest managers really unnecessarily. It's getting in the way of forest managers doing good work and meeting the interests of the public. For example, on the Kootenai National Forest, there's been a stakeholder collaborative that's been meeting for several years now, focused on coming up with a suggested over snow vehicle travel plan. They came up with something. The Forest Service can't move forward with the winter travel planning process because they're under this pause. The Flathead National Forest a few years ago started a process to implement their forest plan through some very targeted travel management planning, which would designate new areas for snowmobile use and close new recommended wilderness areas to snowmobile use and mountain bike use. They've had to pause that. That has also affected their ability to do white bark pine restoration because tied to that travel management plan they were working on was a forest plan amendment related to flying helicopters into recommended wilderness to plant white bark pine seedlings. But they can't do any of that because they're under this pause. And the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest doesn't have a travel management plan and desperately, desperately needs one. And there's a lot of concern within the Forest Service, within conservation groups, within the motorized community, within county government about the various issues stemming from lack of travel management on the Beaverhead Deer Lodge. And so I think all of those illustrate how important travel management planning is, and underscore our concern about potentially losing this rule.
Russ.
Be honest, I don't have much to add. I believe we've all really hammered the point that While the rule is not perfect, I think it's a good rule. We would love to do some have discussions about revising it. And I agree that rescinding this rule would be it would be disastrous. And I think that the decisions that are made would not be would not be abolished. Certainly, we'd be we are, but we have a lot of work to do. And the BBRD is a good example of an area where, man, we know we have issues like the whitetail pipestone off-highway vehicle use. It's the highest level in the state, and one of the symptoms we've seen of that is a news article lately where a family was riding on a trail and there was wire strung across the trail, and someone assumed it was trail sabotage. What it really turned out to be was that um, it was a tenant, a grazing tenant that was managing his grazing allotment. And frankly, I'm sure the family thought they were on a legal trail, but there's no way to know because there's no accurate maps. There's no designated system. So, they're doing their best based on what they know. And just the fact that we don't have a travel management system, we created that conflict. Um, so, I mean, I think it's important that we move forward with the work that needs to be done in the future and improve the rule so that we can have better writing and better opportunities for all users. So, yeah, not much more to add.
Yeah, Jack, take us away.
Okay, some closing thoughts from me is well, uh, most of all, right now, I wish the Forest Service a year ago had said revise instead of using the word repeal. And so Hillary has said it and Russ has said it, but I just want to say it one more time. That's really the big takeaway. We should all be out there working to encourage revising and not repealing this rule. Also, I'm in agreement with the good suggestions that came up about how to make it better. There's one more, maybe I missed it, but I think would help and that is putting myself in the shoes of the Forest Service. I wish it was a little easier to revise a plan. If you want to open a few roads and trails or close a few roads and trails, it should be a relatively quick process to do that. But as it turns out, it's really not. And I think anything that makes that process work better would be good. A few other thoughts is remember that I think the big issue is not the only issue, but the biggest issue is the concern about use off of roads and trails. It's not the use on roads and trails, but it's the specter of that unlimited off-road use. People get to thinking about their favorite stream or meadow or wildlife area, and then it goes downhill from there. Another point I wanted to make is as we move forward, the concepts of local control and designated routes and areas, as I have said, they really do work. And it still enjoys strong support. It did at the time, and everything I'm learning now is that it still does. It's never 100%, but it's strong. Uh, Another point is, especially thinking about a complete repeal, is it's important to honor the years of work and collaboration that have taken place the last 20 years. And my gosh, Russ was in like 200 webinars, he said, solving specific issues relating to getting user groups to figure out how are you going to share a trail. And in some cases you can't, and you separate use. But a lot of work went into that, and there's just no way any of that should be just thrown out. I don't think it will be, but it's important that it not. I think it's also important to note that I don't think I'm hearing from hardly anybody that's clamoring for the release of millions of OHVs off of roads and trails. Not hikers, not horseback riders, not bikers, not the Motorcycle Industry Association of America, which Russ, of course, knows a ton about, or the Recreational OHV Association, or the Specialty Vehicle Institute of America. All three of those important organizations have come out and support revision, but oppose repeal. That's a big deal. Certainly the livestock industry doesn't want unregulated OHVs all over their allotments. So we need to hang on to these points of views as we move ahead. And then a couple last thoughts is noting that the recent executive order talked about unnecessary rules and regulations. Nobody likes them. I don't like them. And certainly bad regulations are not good, but good ones are crucial. So be careful and don't support any logic that says eliminate regulations with a chainsaw instead of a scalpel. It's just not the way to go about it. Think of it this way. Should we open our national forest to anybody who wants to raise cattle or cut trees or dump trash or ride where they choose or do what they want? Nobody really wants that. But it takes good regulation and common sense to come up with a way so everybody can share that. So I guess my final thought is my advice is to everybody as we move forward is just stay involved and make sure your voice is heard. A good way to do that, I think, is through Wild Montana. And I would say that another way to do that, if issues are specific to the Forest Service, is go to the website of the National Association of Forest Service Retirees. Lots of current information there that's it's been vetted, it's just top quality, and it will help us move forward. So I think I'll just close there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Russ. That concludes the scheduled part of our program here, and we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. We've got some questions coming into the chat here. I'll actually start with a question of my own though, which Jack, your point just made me consider. Um, what's the rationale being given for rescinding travel management rule? If, as you say, there's a pretty broad consensus that full scale repeal is a bad idea, what's the rationale for doing so? That could be to you or to anybody.
Well, I've asked the question and I never really got an answer to that. Uh, I think my opinion is that there's certainly a viewpoint out there that there's maybe some unnecessary regulations out there, but I'm thinking and I'm hoping that as the discussion moves forward, it will become more clear that it's really not a repeal, but a revision that is needed because I haven't heard a good rationale for a complete repeal. And of course, if a complete reveal happened, uh, I'm not sure what would change the very next day. If you take, say, the plan on the Custer Gallatin 2006, I think Hillary said, that's a plan that went through NEPA and public involvement. And I don't think with a stroke of a pen, the agency or even the administration above it has the authority to just wipe out 20 years of NEPA. So I think that's about all I can say about it.
Yeah. Russ, Hillary, anything to add?
I too have asked, and about the closest thing I've heard that would be a justification was I believe the administration was looking for unnecessary rules, and I kind of get the impression that there was a view that if they floated this out as a potentially one of the rules that they could just do away with. Maybe the feedback that they get would inform whether they move forward with a repeal or not, which I think is a, kind of a strange way of doing business. But that's the closest answer, and that's pure speculation on the part of the source that I spoke to about what goes on in the Beltway.
And I don't have any information. My guess is as good as what's already been shared here.
All right. From the chat, we have a question asking if the travel management rule were to be repealed, what legislative process or procedure would likely be used to accomplish that task? So anyone who feels like it can take that one.
I can take a stab at it and then Jack can correct me or Russ can correct me. But because the travel management rule is an administrative rule, it was written by the Forest Service. It was written under the same kind of process as the roadless rule. So I think we can look at the roadless rule repeal process as, you know, kind of the template for what it would be, which would be you have to go through rulemaking to unwrite a rule, just like you have to go through rulemaking to write a rule. So it would be, my understanding is, it would be or will be a rulemaking process done through the Forest Service. Um, but Jack, if you have, or Jack or Russ, if you guys know more, feel free to chime in.
Well, I'm just going to guess that what would happen is that there will be new travel management plans created, but that couldn't happen until a new rule of some kind replaces the existing rule. And if that happens, then in a way you could say, well, if there's a new rule, is it a revision of the old one or not? It's got to cover the same subjects because there's a lot of legal issues intertwined from top to bottom throughout the entire process.
All right, thank you both. One more question. If the rule is repealed, what does that mean for travel management in Montana? And specifically, what does that mean for forests with travel plans or forests without travel plans?
I can
Who
take
wants
this one
to?
too, I guess. Or Jack, were you about to say something?
No, no, I was going to wait and see what you said.
Um, if the rules repealed, it should not exist, should not affect existing travel plans. As I think Jack or maybe as Russ mentioned, each of those is a standalone legal document, some of them in place for 20 years or more. Um, those wouldn't change. But any future decisions related to travel management, whether it was trying to change a decision within, add a new trail or close a trail or something within an existing plan, or if in the case of the Beaverhead Deer Lodge that doesn't have a plan, like figuring out how to manage use there, that's a big question. It would depend on what replaced the travel management rule. If it's revised or replaced with another rule that's not called the travel management rule, but accomplishes similar things, then any decisions made regarding motor vehicle use, access, designations, what have you, would occur under that new regulation. If it's repealed and not replaced with anything, then you have forest plans that provide some kind of high level, instructions on where motorized use is and is not suitable. It There's, special orders that the Forest Service could implement on a kind of one-off basis, but those have to be renewed pretty frequently. And it becomes very questionable, very chaotic as to how exactly motor vehicle use would be managed moving forward, is my perspective. Jack, Russ, you guys have other perspectives on what might happen?
No, I think Hillary, I think you're right on the money, and I think that the tragedy of repealing the rule is that the work that needs to be done in the future would have to wait. It's just a delay in the process until another rule is in its place, or you know, or someone rules by a special order indefinitely. I just don't see it as an efficient way to move forward.
And I was thinking that if there was a complete repeal and all of a sudden there was nothing, I do think Hillary and Rush, you're right. Existing plans would stand. But until something happened, I think what did ensue would be determined through the courts because I just cannot imagine that there would not be litigation over a complete repeal and not replacing it with something. Just an opinion.
All right. Thanks all. There was one more question in the chat, not specifically related to travel management, but related to the roadless rule, which is close enough that I figure is worth addressing, especially since we've got a couple minutes. The question is, it's a three-parter. If an area is converted to roadless, can hikers and horse riders continue to use that road? Can bikers continue to use that road? And can the public remove deadfall from the road? So Hillary, I might tee you up with this one if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think this question highlights the fact that the roadless rule and the travel management rule are close cousins, and often kind of confused. So the roadless rule doesn't actually have anything to do with travel management. The roadless rule has to do with road building and logging on areas of national forest land that have not ever had road building and logging in them before. So you can't convert an area to roadless under the roadless rule. Um, if it's not roadless now, it's not going to become roadless in the future under the roadless rule. Uh so the yeah, so the roadless rule is just it prohibits road building and it prohibits commercial logging, and there's exceptions to both of those, but it doesn't have anything to do with travel management. So you can have designated motorized trails in roadless areas, so ATV trails, dirt bike trails, e-bike trails, snowmobiling. Those are all activities that are totally allowed in roadless, but those activities are managed by the travel management rule, so separate regulation. Travel management dictates it's the rule that drives the process for designating the trails for those different motorized activities. And those designations can occur in roadless areas. Um, and I don't know if that answers the question. It doesn't, I didn't, I guess, really get to the three parts of the question, but I think if a road is closed, so travel management, there are road closures that occur under the travel management rule. There's different parts of the travel management rule. One part of it is related to roads. And so there's a lot of Forest Service roads that are on the landscape, but they're administrative, they're gated, or maybe they're, technically not there. They're old roads, they're not on the system anymore, but we all see them out on the landscape still. Um, that's under travel management. Yes, hikers and horse riders can travel cross country. So even if it's not a if it's not a designated trail for motor vehicle use, then it's considered cross-country travel by that use. But horses and hikers can travel cross-country, so you can use closed road beds. Um, Bikes, it depends on the forest. So some national forests have special orders that kind of dictate mountain bike use and access, kind of mimicking the travel management rule, the Gallatin being an example of that. But a lot of national forests don't have real clear direction on human-powered bicycle use. Um, and then as far as removing deadfall from, closed road beds, uh, I might bump that over to Jack because I think that's a Forest Service answer. Yeah.
No, I think you answered. Uh, I agree with what you said, uh, Hillary. As far as what the relationship to travel management, it's interesting when you go into the rule. One of the big debates was, so what is a road? And the definition of a road is if it appears on the map. There's all kinds of two tracks and stuff all through the woods, and you can get in all kinds of argument about what is a road and what is not. But if it's on a map, it's a road. As far as clearing it, that's probably case by case. But as long as it's not in classified wilderness, it can be cleared in a number of different ways. And one last thought on the whole roadless uh, rule issue is, Hillary, as you were talking, and that is the same mantra that we've been talking about, revise rather than repeal, in my view, applies there too. It's a it's a good it's a good rule, but it could use a little bit of work.
And if I could chime in, I'm not aware of anything within Forest Service rules that would prohibit a non-motorized user from cutting a dead log on a route if they needed it to access their hunting camp if it were on an old road. It just would not be legal to travel on on motorized use, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. One thing I do want to add is there's a great deal of confusion about the roadless rule, and one instance that I can point to was a Facebook post where someone was walking on a trail and the trail was all laced up with deadfall, and they said, this is why we need to remove the repeal the roadless rule so the Forest Service can get in and clear these trails. And I didn't comment, but I should have. The truth is, the Forest Service still can't clear the trails because they don't have the manpower, and the rule has nothing to do with that. And the trails are getting cleared by groups like the Montana Trail Vehicle Riders Association and the Backcountry Horsemen and Great Falls Trail Bike Riders and the countless volunteers who are out doing the work because they love to ride trails. So, rather than getting rid of rules you don't understand, I would suggest that you join a local club, backcountry horseman, off-highway vehicle group, and become educated about what can really be done to benefit public land use.
All right. I love that as a place to end. If you want to get involved, there's all sorts of ways with all of our various organizations. We will be posting this recording on the Wild Montana YouTube page if you want to revisit it or share it with anybody else who's interested in these sorts of things. If you do have any questions and want to follow up offline, feel free to get in touch with any of us. I know Hillary and my contact information is easily findable online. We can also easily connect you to Russ or Jack, assuming they're okay with that. Yeah, and with that, thanks everybody. Really appreciate you joining us and have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
you.